I would like to thank SAMHSA for allowing us to share this information with you today. And again, thank you all for joining us. It is now my honor to turn this webinar over to our guest co-hosts so they can introduce themselves when they begin their presentation. Linda, welcome.
Thank you so much, Gail. I'm Linda Richter. I'm the Vice President of Prevention, Research, and Analysis at Partnership to End Addiction, which is a national nonprofit that is looking to change the way our nation approaches substance use and addiction. We're located in New York, and I'm really excited to be able to share this presentation with you today. Should I go ahead and get started? Gail? Okay.
Yes,
I'm going to
please.
go ahead. Oh. Okay, terrific. Rethinking Substance Use. That's the name of this presentation, and I'll just go ahead and get started. So in light of the effects of the COVID pandemic, the US Surgeon General recently issued an advisory on youth mental health, declaring alarming increases in the prevalence of certain mental health challenges. The advisory called for action by the institutions that surround young people, each of which has an important role to play in supporting their mental health. And these institutions include families, schools, community organizations, healthcare systems, media, and government. And we know that the issue of youth mental health, which is on everyone's mind nowadays, is deeply intertwined with the issue of youth substance use. But whereas the need to involve all the entities and institutions that surround young people to address the youth mental health crisis is widely acknowledged, the same perspective is rarely applied in practical terms to protecting youth from substance use and addiction. So what I'd like to talk about today is the need to shift our thinking and our actions when it comes to youth substance use if we're going to meet today's many threats to the health and well-being of kids. Next slide, please. Actually, sorry, go back up one more. No, up. Right there, thank you so much. So let's start with the current state of affairs when it comes to youth substance use. Looking at recent data from the Monitoring the Future study, which samples 8th, 10th, and 12th graders nationally, we see the usual suspects when it comes to which substances are popular among youth: alcohol, nicotine, increasingly marijuana, and to a lesser extent, other illicit drugs. Next slide, please. So note that these data are capturing substance use during the developmental period roughly considered adolescence, which is the age that receives the most attention when we talk about the risks and consequences of substance use. And that's because adolescence, like early childhood, is a period of extreme, rapid, and intense brain development. Having two teenagers myself, I know very well that this stage of life can elicit eye rolls from adults and a general fear of the sometimes erratic and volatile nature of kids this age. But if you think about it, the changes are actually really wonderful in that they allow kids to open themselves up to new experiences and opportunities for learning, which help get them ready for adulthood. Being open to new experiences inevitably comes with risks. And that's where the problem is when it comes to substance use at this age. Adolescents are physically primed to take
You're muted.
I got muted along with everybody else. Sorry about that. So talking about the adolescent brain, they're primed to take risks and seek new experiences and sensations. And the parts of the brain that allow them to do that are kind of like in hyper mode during this stage of development. And unfortunately, the parts of the brain that do a good job of weighing risks and benefits, making good decisions, those parts are still undergoing development during adolescence and are actually really no match for the adolescent brain's risk-taking tendencies. So a famous adolescent psychologist, Lawrence Sternberg, equates the teenage brain to a car that has a well-functioning accelerator, but only a partially functioning brake. And that's why adolescence is the developmental stage that's most vulnerable to substance use and its consequences. Another reason is that in addition to being more prone to taking risks, like using substances, once an addictive substance enters the brain of an adolescent, the effects are more consequential than they are for adults. And they have a greater impact on the structure and the functioning of the still developing brain. So these consequences include a heightened risk that substance use will progress to addiction. Next slide, please. In fact, the majority of adults with a substance use disorder or addiction began using an addictive substance during adolescence. And here you can see two charts that show the significant trend for early initiation of substance use to be associated with the development of addiction, and how people who do not start using, in this case, alcohol or marijuana, until they are closer to adulthood are far more protected from developing addiction. Next slide, please. But given that these physiological processes that occur in the adolescent brain are normal and inevitable, wouldn't we expect most kids to be using addictive substances and suffering the consequences? In fact, that's actually never been the case. And increasingly, young people have been staying away from substance use in growing numbers. The trend data you could see here show that the majority of 12th graders in the United States report no use of nicotine, alcohol, or drugs in the past month. And about a third of these high school seniors say they've never used these substances at all. Next slide, please. And on the flip side, the most recent data from 2021 show that the substance use rates among adolescents declined significantly this past year across all substances. And that's probably due to reduced access, more time with family, and less time and opportunity to use with peers during the pandemic. Next, please. So how are we to reconcile these two bits of information that we have about adolescents? On the one hand, they're biologically prone to engage in risky substance use, but yet most do not. And also, generally, with the exception of a couple of substances like vaping and marijuana, the number who do use has been declining over recent decades. So maybe it means that while biology is a powerful force when it comes to risk, there are other influences in a child's life that might be equally or more powerful. And one way to make sense of the recent trends is to look at what other trends have been happening at the same time that the youth substance use rates have generally been declining. And this chart shows some of them. So paralleling declines in youth substance use, we see certain increasing trends in things that we know to be protective against youth substance use, such as those seen on the left of the chart. And we're seeing certain declining trends in what we know can increase the risk of youth substance use, such as some of those seen on the right. And taken together, these shifts in a generally positive direction, they might represent the culmination of the past few decades of public health and educational advances that have focused not just on teaching kids the academic content that they've been required to learn for decades, but also on improving youth well-being, paying more attention to early childhood development, and a growing appreciation for the role that social and emotional health play in fostering resilient youth. Next slide, please. This general trend toward creating a physically and mentally healthier environment for kids can be seen in recent shifts in how we conceptualize addiction and how we approach substance use prevention in this country. So the moral model of addiction was prominent for many, many years, where addiction was considered a failure of morality, character, and well-being. This perspective contributes to the stigma associated with addiction, and it puts the responsibility for developing addiction squarely on the individual. Prevention and treatment approaches that follow this model center primarily on spiritual interventions to develop good moral character, scare tactics to keep kids away from using, and legal interventions to punish people who do use substances. The biomedical or disease model came next, drawing on advances in genetic and brain research and relying more on biological explanations for addiction and less on moral explanations. And this model allowed for prevention and treatment efforts to move from the legal and spiritual domain to the medical and psychological domain, shifting some blame away from the individual's character and onto the disease itself. The current prevailing model builds on this and broadens the approach, conceptualizing addiction as biopsychosocial, which better accounts for the full scope of factors that we know contribute to addiction. It gives equal weight to biological, genetic, psychological, and sociocultural factors. And this model underscores the importance of a broad and comprehensive approach to youth substance use, one that addresses all the points of influence on a young person that can either increase the risk of or protect against substance use and addiction. Next, please. So that all sounds like we're on the right track. And to reiterate, there certainly is good news. Rates of non-use among kids are increasing. Rates of use are declining. There's a more nuanced, health-based approach to addiction and a more nuanced, multifaceted approach to prevention. But clearly, something is still missing in our approach, since rates of youth substance use are still high, and kids are still drawn to all forms of substance use, including vaping, drinking, and increasingly marijuana. We also know that whereas fewer kids overall might be using than in the past, many of those who are using are doing so excessively and in a risky way. And there's also a growing mental health crisis among youth. And if we know anything, we do know how closely tied mental health problems are to substance use risk. And finally, we know that the influences that promote youth substance use are highly prevalent in our media, popular culture, and in our lax marijuana regulations and loopholes in vaping regulations, all of which are making many parents feel overwhelmed in trying to protect their kids. Next, please. So where do the limitations in our approach lie? The traditional approach to keeping young people from using addictive substances is to target the factors in their life that influence their risk of using, including their own personal characteristics and influences from parents, peers, schools, community, the media, and beyond. However, in practice, most substance use prevention programs do not really meet this goal. They largely target the individual child and not their parents, schools, and communities. They largely focus on risk reduction rather than on promoting health and resilience. They mostly begin in adolescence rather than early childhood when the seeds of risk and resilience are planted. And they tend to address only a small portion of factors that are associated with substance use, rather than the broader social determinants of risk and protection. And that's why it's so important to rethink not only how and when we deliver prevention to kids, but also what actually constitutes effective prevention. Next, please. So in other words, our focus is probably too narrow. We focus on avoiding risks, but we pay inadequate attention to promoting positive, healthy development. We focus on the individual child, teaching about substance use and skills to resist peer pressure, but we pay inadequate attention to the many broader social, structural, and contextual factors that really carry far more weight in determining an individual's actual risk of using substances or developing addiction. We direct the majority of our prevention efforts and resources to schools, and to a lesser extent, parents, but we put most of the responsibility on them. At the same time, we pay inadequate attention to the social policies and community supports and resources that play such a significant role in a family's and a school's ability to protect kids. And while this might seem a little more nuanced, we tend to focus on evidence-based programs, which is for good scientific reasons. But unfortunately, these inevitably target outcomes that are easy to measure over a short period of time, which means we might be overlooking longer-term, harder to measure outcomes, and those that might affect broader protective changes in a child's family and community. Next, please. So those are the problems as we see them, but there are solutions if we have the will to modify our approach. So first, we have to follow the evidence that clearly shows the need to start earlier, much earlier. This doesn't mean teaching kindergarteners about the risks of cocaine or heroin use. It really means recognizing the significant overlap between the factors that are known to impede healthy child development and those known to increase the risk of youth substance use, and learning from the early childhood development field about how to lay the groundwork for a healthy, protective childhood. But we in the substance use field too often miss those lessons by overly focusing on the adolescent years. we have to recognize that the more we attend to children from an earlier age, the less cumulative risk there will be when they enter their teen years and become highly vulnerable to substance use. Beginning our efforts at or near adolescence is just too late to undo some of the deeply entrenched risk factors that can accumulate over a child's lifetime. So regardless of how effective early interventions are at mitigating risk, adolescence is still a critical life stage for preventing substance use. So rethinking our approach does not mean getting rid of current adolescent-focused interventions, which are obviously very necessary. It just means that those are not sufficient and that we have to start earlier and broaden our approach. Next, please. So in what ways do the early years matter so much? So many of you have heard, I'm sure, about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, which are important indicators of both risk factors related to adolescent substance use and to substance use itself. So this means that when risk factors are present in adolescence, it typically suggests that a child has already been exposed to other risk factors in their past. By beginning prevention efforts earlier in development, we can target some of those foundational risk factors before they're entrenched and compounded. A growing body of research that is looking at ACEs in early development, including large studies being conducted by the National Institute on Drug Abuse and researchers in other universities, is showing the far-reaching and profound effects that early experiences can have on a child's risk profile. So early adversity is associated with impaired neurodevelopment, social development, emotional development, and in some cases, physical development. The research also shows that these experiences can activate the body's stress response system. Intense, repeated, or prolonged stressors such as neglect, maltreatment, or poverty can result in what's called toxic stress, where the body's stress response system is activated for extended periods of time, producing cascading effects on the brain and affecting attention, decision-making, learning, emotion, and impulsivity, among other critical functions, all of which are tied to substance use risk. These effects can be intergenerationally transmitted, for example, with the experience of abuse or neglect, or growing up in an unstable home, affecting the child in the long term, and how that child raises the next generation of children, and so on. This highlights the importance of addressing the root causes of these ACEs to stop the intergenerational transmission of harmful behaviors, including substance use. Next, please. So, childhood experiences that increase the odds of adolescent substance use exert their influence in a cascading way across the developmental lifespan. The interaction of risk factors in infancy can lead to risk factors in toddlerhood, which then interact to lead to risk factors in childhood, adolescence, and so on. Introducing protective factors, such as by supporting parents' mental health, parenting skills, or providing parents with effective addiction treatment, can balance out or mitigate this progression of risk. There are many things parents themselves can do, even in the face of mounting adverse experiences, to help develop the key ingredients of protection for children, which include the essential characteristics of self-regulation and resilience. Next, please. So I'm just going to quickly run through these cascading developmental processes that lay the groundwork for risk or protection from adolescent substance use. And these are like the components of that, three-part cascade I was showing on the previous slide. In the prenatal stage, and then in infancy and early childhood, parents' health and well-being affect children's health and resilience. When a child is born to parents with untreated addiction or mental health problems, or if the family has serious economic stress, it sets the stage for some of the early risk factors for later substance use, including parental neglect or an insecure attachment between the parent and child, which elevate child stress. So to mitigate these risks at this early stage of development, families need support for economic security, food and housing security, treatment for mental health or addiction problems, and to learn effective parenting skills, all of which help to reduce this cascading effect of early childhood stress. Next, please. If those risks aren't adequately addressed in infancy and early childhood, they can lead to a poor parent-child relationship, poor child self-regulation, and mental health problems, which then increase the risk for behavioral problems in early childhood, poor social functioning, and poor school readiness. And parents can still mitigate these risks by working to form a secure parent-child bond through warm and consistent caregiving, healthy discipline, and reasonable limit setting, which all help children develop the essential protective characteristics of self-regulation and resilience. But again, parents need support systems to be in place to allow them the time, the energy, and the capability to practice these essential parenting skills. Next, please. If the risk factors in early and middle childhood aren't properly addressed, they can lead to the child's poor bonding with their school or community, affiliating with peers who engage in risky behaviors, and difficult relationships with their parents. And these risks, if left unaddressed, we know have a high probability of leading to adolescent substance use. But even at this later stage, there are still things parents can do, given the right knowledge and support, to mitigate the risks. And these include providing guidance to their kids, being a good role model for health, identifying signs of problems or risk early, and boosting a child's self-regulation, resilience, and social and emotional competence. Next, please. So a spate of really interesting findings from the National Institute on Drug Abuse and researchers at WashU and at Columbia show just how powerful these early adverse childhood experiences are in influencing children's brain development and future resilience and well-being. So some examples include maternal distress during pregnancy, which has been associated with impaired neurodevelopment, social development, emotional development, and cognitive development in babies, which are then associated with poor mental health and physical health in the child. And even more striking and less likely to be recognized as related directly to adolescent substance use is the far-reaching effects of family income instability or poverty. You may have seen this in the news recently, came out a few weeks ago, a study that found that simple cash payments to low-income families were associated with more optimal brain activity during a baby's first year of life. And while these data are new and a lot of follow-up is still needed and in the process, it's consistent with other research that shows the profound effects of family income instability or unsafe neighborhoods or parent stress on parents and children, which is then associated with brain impairment in children, which is known to be linked to later substance use and mental health problems. Next, please. So clearly starting early is very important, but so is the need to broaden our focus to encompass not just individual characteristics that increase substance use risk, but also the broader structural factors that could on their surface seem to have little to do with substance use. So there's no doubt that parents are the most important influence over their children's decisions to use alcohol, nicotine, and drugs, but that doesn't mean that they should bear all the responsibility for it. We have to do a much better job to set the stage for parents to be able to offer protections for their children by providing them the supports they need to create a nurturing and health promoting environment for their kids. Next, please. So broadening our focus means forging collaborations with experts in other fields that prioritize healthy child development, family stability, and reducing systemic inequalities that contribute to the adverse childhood experiences that are so central to substance use risk. I've been working in this field for 25 years, and never before have I been this optimistic about the potential to make really significant strides against youth substance use and addiction. So partially due to the pandemic, partially due to recent research, and partially to a more diverse generation of young professionals who are eager to make significant change, we're in a really historic moment right now where there's national attention being paid to the importance of investing in the early social determinants of risk and health. So recent laws and policies that arose in the context of the opioid epidemic and the COVID pandemic, and that continue to emerge in the face of this urgent mental health crisis, are finally trying to do something real to alleviate the burdens on families and communities that stand in the way of them raising healthy, resilient kids. We're finally talking seriously about targeting child mental health and social emotional well-being, along with family needs like income, housing, childcare, and healthcare security, that could directly prevent and reduce the effects of adverse experiences that we know lead to substance use risk among youth. Next, please. So I won't go through the specifics or read through this list, but here I'll just quickly show you some examples of policies or programs in these congressional acts and recent laws that directly address the broader determinants of risk and protection for substance use within the realm of generally supporting families. Next, please. So to better conceptualize this more expansive approach to healthy youth development and substance use prevention, it might help to look to what's known as the Swiss cheese model of prevention. So this model posits that workplace accidents or harmful outcomes in other settings occur when failures align across multiple layers of defense within a system. So mitigation measures for COVID relied on the Swiss cheese approach, layering mask wearing requirements on top of social distancing requirements, on top of stay-at-home recommendations, on top of border crossing restrictions, on top of vaccine mandates, all with the goal of putting many layers of protection between the individual and the virus. This way, if any given layer is breached, alternative protection measures would remain in place. So we can apply this model to substance use, thinking of prevention efforts targeting each level of risk exposure: individual, family, school, community, sociocultural, as layers of protection, each that has inherent shortcomings or holes, but together form a comprehensive prevention approach. So while the discrete layers might be imperfect, when they're superimposed upon one another, they really provide the most robust protection possible. And the more layers of protection that work together, the less likely it is that the risk factors present at any one level will ultimately result in the development of a substance use disorder in the child or the adolescent. So according to this model, making further progress in prevention will require adding and bolstering early and broader layers of protection. Next, please. So to that end, I'd like to alert you to some resources that my organization has that might be helpful. So first on the left is the report on which this presentation is based, which is a research and policy-based description of a lot of the issues I just discussed. And it was just published and is available to download for free on our website, drugfree.org, or in the hyperlink on the slide. And on the right is a guide that we recently published that's more directly for parents, that provides research-based tools and recommendations for raising resilient kids starting from a very young age. And it's also available on our website and on the link. Next, please. We also offer a broad range of supports for families as they address a loved one's risk for actual substance use. So we have tailored research-based services for families who are anywhere along the continuum, from a parent trying to build resilience in their young child, to those interested in preventing substance use in their adolescents or young adult children, to those dealing more directly with a child who's actively using substances or struggling with addiction, to those with a loved one in recovery. And as you can see on the right, we also recently created a risk assessment tool for parents who might be wondering about the level of risk their child or other loved one has for substance use or addiction. And again, these resources are free and available on our website. Next, please. So finally, before I pass it on to my co-presenter, Greg, I would just like to leave you with the thought that's on this slide. By intervening earlier and more broadly, we could promote child health, prevent youth substance use and addiction, avoid future drug epidemics, and reduce the damaging consequences of addictive substances on future generations. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And now I'll pass it back to Gail or directly to Greg. Thank you.
I think it goes right to Greg, and thank you so much, Linda. This was very informative.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Linda, and all the work y'all do at the Partnership to End Addiction. It was really informative to learn a lot of this stuff. I mean, you shared it earlier this week, your PowerPoint, and there was a lot of things that really resonated with me. And I was asked a few weeks ago or a month or so ago by Gail and the team over at the Federation of Families to be a part of this webinar. And she asked if I would, be willing to share my personal story of recovery, which was kind of surprising because a lot of my work I'm really the one that's kind of facilitating and helping people share their stories or put them on platforms. And I share my story here and there, but always when asked, I'm happy to share, and especially in conjunction with this topic. So you see, I got a little picture there, not just for the that's cute factor. Although I must say I am looking pretty cute in my overalls or topless there, but and you might notice in there, my daughter, I actually have a 6-year-old daughter, and she saw the TV and she's like, "Daddy, what is those metal things sticking out of the back of the TV?" Some of you all may relate or may remember times with those rabbit ears in the back of the TV. And if you do, I'd love for you to drop in the chat what was a TV show maybe when you were young that you could get with those rabbit ears. As is, just to date myself a little more, I was a little before cable TV was real popular. So a lot of times, I remember staying home from school, and the most you would maybe, get was Sesame Street, when that was just for an hour. There was no, watching hundreds of episodes or back to back, or, binge watching shows. And now, thankfully, that is one of the things that's changed. There's a lot of positive entertainment and stuff for kids, and a lot of negative as well. But we can go ahead with the next slide, please. So Dr. Richter talked a lot about, supporting healthy and stable families. This was my family growing up. That's my dad and my mom and me at about maybe 2 years old, or a little bit younger. And I think, we would all venture to say that would be the ideal situation for kids to grow up with. It would be in a stable family with, 2 parents. Both my parents were, graduates of high school. They had employment, so it wasn't a situation which, we kind of heard about. Other was sort of lack of resources or those sorts of things. But, they were young. My dad was about 21, and I think my mom was 18 when I was born. If you go to the next slide, please. So a short time later, when I was about 2 or 3, this became my family unit, which was me and my mother. My dad lived in the same city. He was not involved in my life in a consistent basis, like a lot of young people who grow up with a single parent. Most often it's a single mother who is kind of forced to take in on those dual roles. One of the things that in working with young people, I do a lot of presentations with young people where I'll take young people out and do presentations for other groups of young people. And so a number of years ago, we were in Arizona, and we went to Canyon State Academy, and I took 4 young men there to present and share their stories. And Canyon State Academy is kind of like a step down from a juvenile detention center, basically, where a lot of kids are about to go to juvenile detention or corrections, or just came out. And so we were doing a presentation to all the young men, and there was about 300 of them sitting in the bleachers. And one of the young men that was presenting said, "How many of y'all grew up without a father in your life?" And like the sea of hands of, like 85% of the young men raised their hand of not growing up without a father in their life. And, and that was my, experience. Well, but it was really so eye-opening to see. And I've seen many other, kind of things around trauma. And if you go to the next slide, please. If around trauma and various aspects of things like that, of what that can kind of do to a young person, who experiences those types of things. And, one of the ACEs pieces, which is on the next slide, go ahead and go on to the next slide there. It's talked about the adverse childhood experiences, and, which is largely based around trauma experiences that kids experience. And oftentimes, we think of trauma as only, what happens to people who go to war. And that's, they're exposed to these very traumatic, things of losing limbs, or all those types of things that are just oftentimes happen in war. But we don't really think of the fact of the trauma that can often occurs to young people who experience things, like neglect, like sexual abuse and various different kinds of abuses, which obviously are extremely traumatic. But there's also, trauma associated, which was indicated on one of those slides, with things like, divorce or separation or just not having that parent in your life. And so those types of, things can lead to a lot of different negative outcomes. And it was, was in the presentation, can lead to atypical brain development, which can cause all different, sorts of things. That previous slide and a big focus of the previous presentation was around addressing these things earlier. Like, so how can we start addressing these things earlier? And we have made, lots of progress in early childhood education or in the early years of, elementary school with things like social and emotional learning, which do some good as far as introducing things to young people in terms of lessons and to help understand their emotions. But a lot of times, prior to that and even now, those emotions get stuffed and then they come out in negative ways. So as a young boy who, my dad would do things like, okay, well, it's Saturday, I'm going to come, pick you up on Saturday and we're going to go do this, this, and this. And so Saturday would come and he wouldn't show up. I would sit there and, wait in the window for hours and hours. And it would just be, no call, no show sort of thing. And so that as a young person is traumatic and can have a lot of negative, consequences. And is something, still as an adult, still have, issues with around that. So I think it's important for us to recognize that our young people are going through a lot of trauma. Some of it is extreme type of things that we think of as trauma, but other things are, things like I described, which may not seem all that extreme, but they're having those negative effects. So if we can start addressing those things earlier, well, obviously we're going to definitely improve the outcome. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this is me around 15-ish years old, and it was also talked about that adolescent is that development stage where we're most vulnerable to initiating experiments with substance use, and also learn from this presentation from those, the earlier we start, the more likely we're to become addicted and have those negative outcomes. And that was the case for me about this time of this picture when I was 15, growing up in Louisiana. The drinking age was 18. It was before the Department of Motor Vehicles had everything, digitized and digital and computers. So I got a senior from high school's birth certificate who was 18. I went down to the Department of Motor Vehicles. I told them I lost my license. They, showed them the birth certificate. They took a new picture, and I walked out of there with a real state of Louisiana driver's license that said I was 18 years old and that my name was Diego Martinez. And so from then it was, a high school bar scene, like literally that's what we did in high school. We went out to the bars and my mom always instilled in me, be good, don't do drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And I took that to heart for, early on. And so it would just kind of, well, I'm not going to just drink, but I'm not going to smoke weed. And then I, smoked weed for the first time and then kind of liked it. Honestly, a lot of those first times of using of the different things was, and I don't like to even call it peer pressure, but I guess it's a form of that, but of just kind of wanting to fit in, wanting to feel a part of. So friends are smoking, well, okay, let me, try that. And then I, liked the way that it affected it felt. And so that I can continue doing that. If you could go to the next slide, please. So, it progressed in high school as far as smoking weed pretty regularly, then started experimenting with ecstasy and some LSD. And then I went off to college. My mom had remarried around this time to my stepdad now, who's an amazing man. And I had, lots of opportunities that, that most kids don't get to, as far as got to go away to Arizona State for college and had a great group of friends out there. And, to be honest, one of the main reasons I went there was Playboy had voted Arizona State the #1 party school in the country for like 5 years in a row. And so I was interested in broadcasting. They had the Walter Cronkite School of broadcast journalism, which was a good kind of cover for my real reason that it was the #1 party school in the country. My drug use really took off there. It was there that I became an all-day, everyday marijuana smoker. It was there I had, never done cocaine and was pretty scared of that there. And that was a time when I tried cocaine for the first time and began doing that, very regularly. This particular picture is I brought friends of mine from college back here to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, and this was like Mardi Gras day after staying up all night. Two of the guys that you see in this picture are also sober in recovery, which is awesome. Another one has passed away, which likely might have been some type of substance use related. But thankfully, some of us had found recovery. I was able to graduate college by the grace of God, and to be honest, really, by being kind of a good liar, cheat, and thief, as far as kind of scheming, cheating through college, and at various times, and doing things that aren't really, in my sense of morals, or things that I'm proud of, but it was, what could I do to be able to still use how I wanted to use and still get by. And so you get pretty resourceful as an addict. And the drug use just continued to increase. By my senior year, I was doing cocaine very, very regularly. Next slide. So I managed to graduate college, as I said, and I had the opportunity to go out to LA to start working in the film industry. The cocaine had slumped down a little bit. I was still doing it very regularly, but the marijuana use had stayed constant there. I found a marijuana dealer who back in the day we used to call it the chronic or kind bud, but very like high octane marijuana. And that was a all day, every day sort of thing. I had some good successes. You see some of the these pictures of out there. I was a nanny for Dustin Hoffman's kids for a number of years, who were cousins through my stepdad. That was a movie I worked on with Sean Young. I was spent a lot of time with the Olsen twins, Mary Kate and Ashley. A friend was their kind of stage mom and studio teacher. And so I had all this positive stuff happening. But when I moved there and I got there, what I started experiencing, what I know now is depression. But at the time, I didn't have any idea what it was. I just, nothing made me happy. Nothing made me sad. I had all this kind of self-consciousness, and was just really awkward and just uncomfortable in my own skin. And, I even remember seeing these depression commercials on TV and thinking, well, I wonder, could that be it? And then, I had a friend there one time, he's like, no, you're not depressed. And so it was about 2.5 years being there and having some success and dealing with this depression, not getting treated. And then I still using, marijuana very consistently. And then I had what was later described as a manic episode. Essentially, went crazy, for lack of a better word. I had been, working on this music video, directing a music video. I had not been sleeping much, and kind of had this, vision to start giving away everything, and, started feeling like I was communicating with, higher powers, and thinking, there's that song, I Bet You Think This Song Is About You. I started hearing messages in various different songs, and was eventually was picked up walking naked down Martin Luther King Boulevard during rush hour traffic in LA. I was hospitalized for the first time, and they diagnosed me with being bipolar with co-occurring substance use disorder. At that time, I could, what I had experienced and all that was so real and vivid. I couldn't really, understand or see that it was, not real. But they said if I didn't, take these medications and stop doing drugs and alcohol, that I was going to keep ending up in places like that. And, I could see maybe the cocaine was a problem and I should stop doing the cocaine, but I couldn't really, buy into the whole thing of not doing marijuana anymore, because marijuana was like my medicine. I could debate you for days about the importance of marijuana and how it's much better than alcohol, and how, I was going to be smoking on the front porch when I was 80 years old, and all these, different things. And so I couldn't buy into that. And I was there for 3 weeks. I ended up getting out, and you can go to the next slide. And so then it was a good, 10 to 15 years. And this mental illness, addiction, and convictions from a poem that I wrote, but of a lot of negative, consequences. I did not heed those warnings as far as, stopping doing drugs and alcohol and taking medication. And so I got a lot of negative outcomes. I've, had about 12, well, more than that, but different hospitalizations. I was not one to, say, hey, I need to get help and go check myself into the mental hospital. I was one that would be petitioned into the hospital, and meaning that the cops would come pick me up and, take me to the hospital. There's lots of kind of controversy, and I obviously that's not the ideal situation, but for some people like myself, when I was, a danger to myself, it was the best option, even though I hated it at the time. In retrospect, it often probably saved my life. The first time I went to drug treatment was I was in the mental hospital in Baton Rouge for about 5 weeks. The only way they would let me out was to go to a drug treatment program. So I went to Hazelden in Minnesota, which was, very fine, well-renowned sort of thing, kind of claimed to have dual diagnosis programming, but really didn't. I got out of there, had, convinced them to do less medicine, got out of there, relapsed. And so it's just this long, pattern. And some of these images, here kind of represented that from some of the places I've been. Cedars-Sinai, ended up, getting arrested for trespassing to the fairgrounds in Louisiana. I was put into Arlington Parish Prison on the psych tier. I had a psychiatric hold put on me. I was there for a month. And, in lots of my different hospitalizations, I was, essentially I would be very, very high in the manic phase. I would come in, they would, give me high doses of tranquilizers to kind of bring me down. A lot of those times I was, restrained and on beds with restraints and all that kind of thing. But for so long, none of that was really enough to put me on the path of doing what I needed to do for recovery and kind of turning the corners. You see on the bottom of that slide, and in working with young people so much, and particularly young people who are transition age or transitioning to adulthood, young people who experience behavioral health challenges are much more likely to have negative consequences, like being homeless, dropping out of school, being involved in criminal justice system, of all these negative, consequences that come along with addiction and mental health issues for young people. You can go to the next slide. So recovery is possible, and very grateful that that I have the life today, and as a result of recovery and second and third and fourth chances. I found my recovery initially, and even currently, through 12-step recovery. So likely most people have heard of that, AA, NA, CA, those types of things. It was something I had been introduced to in treatment centers. I'd been to a couple of substance use treatment centers. And, it was something early on that I never really could commit to or buy into. But, thankfully I got to a place of willingness to do it. I think I found, and there's a lot of stigma around it, largely for, a variety of reasons, but there's a lot of stigma around 12-step recovery within the mental health world of, clinicians or just people in general outside of that. And, there's a saying, which I, like, it's not for everyone, but it'll work for anyone. And I think, it's something that is free, and it really drives down the fact of that peer support or that recovery from another person. And that's kind of been the core of my story and my own recovery and the work that I do with young people is stemmed in the fact that we get better by helping other people get better. So, was part of a very big men's group in Arizona, which we did lots of retreats and did a variety of different things. I, was really involved in what's called Young People's AA, which is essentially AA or 12 steps. But there's groups that do, that are made up primarily of young people. They put on a lot of events and conferences and all different kinds of things like that. But it's really, engaging and showing young people, or really anybody, that they can still have fun being, sober, and that it's cool to be sober. There was one of the things that was, talked to earlier, that there's like the decrease in attitudes of essentially young people thinking that it's cool to do substances. Well, how those attitudes get changed was when more, young people who are quote unquote cool are not doing substances and those sorts of things. Professional help was, another big, piece I, did see and still do see a psychiatrist, and see a therapist as well. So that was a part of my recovery as far as finding the right medication, which I had lots of, troubles with and trials and tribulations with. But, had finally found something that worked that didn't have a lot of the negative side effects. Peer support. So I first got, and obviously the 12-step recovery is built on peer support, like informal peer support. But in the mental health field, we talk, and it's become a pretty regular practice as far as agencies and organizations hiring people who have lived experience with mental health issues to provide a variety of different services, whether it's one-on-one support, running groups, doing those types of things. The Federation of Families is really the national leader and innovator around that on the family support side of things, as far as family.
Greg?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but everybody is asking about family peer support and peer support. So I'm really glad you mentioned that, and I really appreciate it. And your story is unbelievably powerful. So thank you so much for sharing. We have exactly 2 minutes. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer all the questions that everybody has written. But Greg and Linda, if you don't mind, I'm going to send you the questions. And if you could answer them for us. And when we send out the copy of the slides and the certificates, I would love it to have some of those questions answered. One of the big questions was about Magellan and if they funded peer support. So I'm giving you a little heads up. I really appreciate both you and Linda, Greg. This was great. This was so informative and helpful and surprising in many ways. The data that you provided, Linda, was amazing. A special thanks to Dr. Linda Goggin and the NASDAQ staff for helping us run today's event smoothly. And I really appreciate my entire staff. I could not do this alone. And Lachelle has been running the slides.
Yeah, can I just interrupt you?
Absolutely.
I think we're going till 3:30.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's why I was. The event was scheduled till 3:30 or till 3:30.
Oh my gosh! Then we can answer this, guys. I am so sorry. I had to 3 o'clock. I am so sorry. If we can stay, that would be great. I'll wrap up in 20 minutes. I'm sorry, Greg. Go ahead, because we have tons of questions. This would be great.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up pretty quick, and then we can get to questions. So one of the biggest things that helped me was around being of service. And like I said, we get better by helping other people get better. So I was able to start a dual recovery meeting on the campus of the Arizona State Forensic Hospital, which was people just like me, but unfortunately during the midst of episodes or relapse on drugs and alcohol, they committed horrific crimes. I started doing meetings at both of the juvenile detention centers in Arizona, which I'd go on Saturday to one and Sunday to another one, and we would do essentially like 12-step meetings, but basically just sit around and talk with the young people. And that was really, eye-opening there. And this was, shortly before and around the time that marijuana became legal in in Arizona, the medical marijuana stuff was going on, and really just talking in here with these young people and how many of them's lives had already been negatively impacted by the use of marijuana was pretty, it was pretty, disturbing. So next slide, please. And so this is, and I'll post information on all this in the chat here. This is the My Life program, which I started, which was really kind of inspired by my work in 12-step recovery, but it's a free youth program that was started in Arizona, but geared towards young people who 13 to 23, the transition age, who have experience with things like mental health, substance use, foster care, juvenile justice. And it's really about bringing young people together and giving them that voice, and having them opportunities to positively interact and engage with peers, because young people, we know in general, are feeling very alone. Oftentimes the kind of things that come along with addiction or mental health issues are the same kind of things that young people are picked on and bullied about. And so when they can kind of come together with young people who have some shared experiences, it's very beneficial. We also, you go to the next slide. And so we also is an opportunity to really do a lot of community awareness, and basically having, the community learning about mental health issues through the youth. So, and this is a big, huge thing. And so youth involvement matters. And this is something that Federations has been in the forefront of for many years, and kind of birthing Youth Move National, which is another group that I've worked with a lot over the years. But basically in 2002, SAMHSA recognized really the importance of involving youth in the system of cares and really everything. And it helps youth develop social skills, build self-confidence, instills positive supports, cultivates, a lot of those positive relationships. And it really helps organizations, whether it be government or local organizations, to hear the voices of youth. And that was the thing at Magellan and the other organizations we work with. Before we started My Life, everybody's very committed to wanting to improve services and systems that serve youth and outcomes. But we were like asking no youth, hey, what's working? What's not working? How can we make things better? And so that information from young people is very valuable to help us improve services and systems. And just doing that process is very beneficial for the young person, because they can start to see, hey, all this crap I've been through can have a positive impact, because I can use my experience to help others, and maybe kids coming up behind me don't have to, go through all the stuff that I've been through. So really, encourage that. And I think for substance use, it was kind of more common practice for substance abuse treatment before it became, for many years. But I think as this continues to evolve, it's very important. And next slide, please. And so this is just a big youth festival that we have done. I've done 27 around the country, but basically it's a way to really create awareness. And so big thing, we hear a lot about is stigma. And educating the community, because then if we're going to make any real headways around substance use, recovery for young people, mental health issues, which, are also tied together, suicide issues. One, we have to educate the broader community, and the broader community has to care. And so by doing larger events, that's very important. Also, to reduce stigma, a lot of that is just based on lack of knowledge. So if we have young people who have the opportunity to share their stories and engage with, adults, other youth, that really breaks down that stigma, because people can hear from them, hey, this is a young person who deals with substance use issues, but, they're just as capable of achieving their goals and dreams as anyone else if they have the right services and supports and that sort of thing. So it's just a big community issue. Next slide, please. And so, just, recovery and recovering dreams. So, as I mentioned, I moved to LA after college and was working in film and having some success. And then every kind of episode, and due to my substance use and not taking care of my mental health issues, I kept ending up in, just derailed and locked in mental hospitals. And it just basically, the whole thing of working the film, that dream was just crushed. But as a result of recovery and a result of, getting into the work that I do, and that's a beautiful thing, in substance use and mental health issues, one of the most difficult things to recover from can be those crushed, dreams, that crushed spirit, those things you always wanted to do. Well, as things came full circle with me and I got to start doing film stuff again. And about 5 years ago, did a film called Suicide, the Ripple Effect with the guy, Kevin Hines. And then just finished another film, which is called My Ascension, which is based on youth suicide prevention with a young woman, Emma Benoit, who attempted to take her life by suicide when she was 16 and a cheerleader, and is now using her story to help others. And next slide, please. And just, some of the gifts of recovery, I've gotten to, work with literally thousands of young people, mentor, probably close to 100 really directly, a lot of them in foster care who, don't really have family. So just being able to do that, I've been blessed to win lots of awards for my work in youth mental health and, being a person in recovery, which is, always nice. Do a ton of awareness events. That one picture there is at the Pennsylvania State Capitol, done at 5 state capitals, brought young people to advocate for youth mental health issues and all that good stuff. So it's definitely, definitely a blessing for that. And you go to the next slide. And this is my biggest reward for recovery on the right there. That's my daughter, Gracie, who I get to co-parent with her mom, Lacey, who also works in the field. And we have a really great co-parenting relationship. And that's pretty awesome. And this other was kind of coincidentally with looking at, the broader approach and addressing things earlier. This idea for School of Hope is an idea for a TV show that I've had for probably 20 years. And then just over the holidays, really started developing it more and doing a whole treatment for it. But it really goes to the kind of point that we've been talking about and was talked on a lot earlier, is that if we don't start addressing these issues younger, it's like putting your, finger on the dam. We're not really going to have, a big impact. And, we mentioned, and I'll post in there too, the Surgeon General's report on the youth mental health crisis, but there was also a Surgeon General's report the year before, which is on the suicide crisis and call to action around suicide prevention. And one of the things the Surgeon General talked about in there is addressing the upstream factors of suicide prevention. It was just basically the same thing, the theme that's talked about here. And he gave the analogy was that, there's this raging river and it's the dam, and these, people keep drowning and dying, and there's rescue workers that they're just, pulling people out on a daily basis and at their wits' end and tired and, want to give up. And then somebody says, well, why don't we go upstream and figure out why these people were all jumping in the, river or falling in the river to begin with. And, it's so true that we're, just in a business of kind of putting out fires. And obviously we need to work with adolescent substance use, but if we can start addressing some of these things around mental health and substance use issues when kids are in, kindergarten and in these earlier ages, we're going to have much more success and really be able to make a dent in, in these issues. And so, and then the one other thing that I'll just leave you with, which goes to the youth involvement piece, and this, goes a lot. I talk about this a lot with my suicide prevention work, but it goes for, for substance use as well. If we're really going to make any kind of significant dent in these issues for youth have to be an integral part of the solution. So we need to do more things for youth programs, for youth prevention programs, for, building up young people to be involved and then giving them opportunities to be involved so that they can really be an active part of the solution. Because as older folks, we can only do so much. And I think in order to really make a lot of headway, we really have to support the young people and give them opportunities to be a part of the solution. So with that, I'll be quiet and we can do questions.
And again, my sincere apologies, Greg, for cutting you off there. I was off on time, so I apologize to everyone, but especially to you, Greg. What a fabulous story. What I'm really excited about, though, is that we do indeed have time for questions, and we have lots of them. So, a lot came in for Linda at the beginning, and then I have a lot for you too, Greg. And if you don't mind, I can start with one for Linda that was asked several times. And the question was, does this mean use is down even while overdoses are way up? I know you gave some statistics and someone wanted information on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. So when you're talking about the age group that is included in that survey data, it's kind of high school and younger, where opioid use is kind of at a low prevalence. So the overdoses that we're seeing are related primarily to opioid use, which tends to start primarily in young adulthood after adolescence. The kinds of substances that kids are using in adolescence often come before their use of opioids, obviously with the exceptions of kids who are introduced to opioids through legitimate prescriptions from their health professionals who end up becoming dependent on them and may turn later to heroin or illicit opioids. But when you're talking about the adolescent age group and younger, obviously some do use opioid drugs, but it's not at high prevalence for that age group.
Okay, thank you. This is for both of you. How can we bring substance misuse to the forefront as a health issue? The more we talk about substance misuse, we destigmatize the fear and judgment and address real mind-body issues.
I'll just say my part and hand it to you, Greg, because you have much more direct experience with this from your own life and the people you work with. But I'll just say that what we have found at our organization is that if you just specifically keep the focus on substance use, you get some people's attention. But the more we can show people how intricately tied it is to all the other issues that we're concerned about when it comes to kids and young people, the more we can spread the awareness of the importance of these issues. So how closely linked substance use is to mental health problems, to the social issues that I raised toward the end of my presentation of income insecurity or lack of healthcare and all these other things that we need to talk about in our society. These are all highly linked to youth substance use, and having that more complete picture, I think, really will do a service to our field to get more attention to it. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that I agree with that, and that's important. And I think, I think there's a lot of, particularly now with, marijuana kind of being so prevalent and stuff, and just attitudes and in terms of educating people that substance use and their substance abuse, but even substance use can be very, very detrimental for a lot of people, and it kind of looks different for different people. So I think it can kind of be somewhat normalized, and people thinking, oh, it's not that big of a deal. So I think kind of making those distinctions for people, and just like my case, or lots of people's cases, and I was talking to a young person just earlier, thinking, for some people, they might be able to smoke a joint, a few times a week and get a job and it has no negative impact on their lives. For another young person, that same amount of marijuana could have extremely detrimental, impacts on their lives. So I think it's important to that. But then also to her point, I think, the substance use is just a symptom. We're basically at a pace of treating symptoms of the other stuff, the underlying issue. So I think the more we can treat those.
Thank you. Several people asked about insurance companies and managed care. They're wondering if managed care and insurance companies are funding prevention efforts, and are they also funding the workforce, like family and peer support?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the managed care organization, I think, but it also primarily depends on the different contracts for the cities or the states. So Magellan has, peer support services as part of the different, public contracts that we have, as well as kind of a variety of, treatment things. But, ultimately the managed care companies are kind of taking their dictates from the state or from whoever the customer is or the county is. So a lot of that kind of flows through that. And I think it's kind of nuanced. It's not my direct area, but it's kind of nuanced from state to state, and then different federal prevention dollars and whether they go to the state or the managed care company or whatnot. But, Magellan, the My Life program through Magellan is just something we, fund because it's a kind of giving back to the community type of thing. It's not like something we bill for or make money from or whatever.
Thank you. How can this information be applied to schools and students? There was a lot of people asking how they can transfer this into their own schools. Any ideas?
You want to
Oh,
take that? Or?
yeah, sure. So, a lot of the things that we talked about, which is sort of taking some of the burden off the child, him or herself, or even off the parents, and really kind of having everyone be responsible for prevention of youth substance use and related problems. And when I say everyone, I mean the adults that interact most commonly with children. And that includes the people at their school, it includes health professionals, it includes a mentor in the community, clergy, whoever. But the more schools can be aware, and I think they are becoming quite aware of the significant role of a child's social and emotional health and resilience and well-being, and the more they can attend to those characteristics from an early age in childhood, the more they're going to be putting in the necessary ingredients for resilience and including knowledge and the skills that are needed to resist, substance use or going down the path to substance use and addiction. So we've already started doing this in our school system in this country, of broadening the role of schools from just kind of educating about the academic topics to kind of really looking more toward the whole child. Of course, schools are really tapped in terms of the available resources to do this, and they need a ton of help. And when I talked toward the end of my presentation about this being a very opportune time in our country in terms of policies that are changing and funding that's becoming available to schools to support students' social emotional health, we're really starting to see a lot of that coming towards schools right now. It's one of the silver linings of the COVID pandemic, potentially, is this greater recognition of the importance of child mental health. So I'm quite hopeful that we're going to see some improvements in the role that schools can play in helping to foster mental health and resilience in kids.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the challenge is it's just so different everywhere you go. So like even within the same school district, different high schools and different schools will have different practices. And then when you start different districts within the states, and it's very complicated, unfortunately. But I think one thing I just would really encourage, in particular here with the Federation of Families, is for parents to realize how much power you really do have. We've seen that a lot on, some would say, kind of the negative side of things, where people are up in arms and screaming and hollering at school board meetings about things. Well, I think if we really, more parents, had really demanded more action around, these types of things, whether it's social emotional learning, whether it's substance use, groups and different things, particularly around the suicide and mental health thing. There's some great group programs, school clubs, like Hope Squad is one that I work with a lot. There's Sources of Strength, which is another one, that are just really building on the peer-to-peer component. I think more of that stuff is so valuable and so needed, but I think ultimately parents got to, get on it and, advocate for that, as well as the students as well.
Mm-hmm. We have a question. How do we address racial disparities and inequities that affect young people seeking somebody who could fill the empty feelings and become parents inadvertently? So what do we do when then their kids may have a rough start and it passes on generational trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tremendous problem. In Linda's presentation talks about kind of the importance of mentors and having those supports, and I think that's a huge thing. There are some organizations, some that I've connected with, that are doing a lot around the mentoring piece, or even just kind of training fathers. There's one here locally called Fathers on a Mission. There's some other works doing, but I think empowering the community, and also as mental health professionals working with the community to utilize those kind of resources from there, in terms of having types of mentors and mentoring programs that can help young people connect to their various culture, and be able to maybe play that role in helping reduce some of that generational trauma and things associated with that.
And I believe Michelle has pointed something out. She says, in my area, we are seeing the top 3 risk factors as low commitment to school, family conflict, and parents' favorable attitudes towards alcohol and substance use. How do you recommend addressing these situations when you have to have a resource?
Yeah, I mean, this is a family group and we talk about the role of parents. And that's why I just keep emphasizing like all the burden and responsibility cannot be put on parents. And there are many families where the parents are not great resources for their children. And that's why we have to broaden the scope here of who is responsible for helping kids grow up to avoid substance use. And that's why we need every adult to kind of look upon themselves as having that responsibility if they have any interactions with children at all. So it's schools, it's community leaders, it's older siblings, it's cousins, it's friends. It's just kind of anyone who's a bit older who could take on that responsibility of helping the kids get through the difficult life stages of, early and mid-adolescence. So obviously there's many cases where it's not going to be the parent, and that's where we really need other people to step in.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, there's just lots of people out there that don't have parenting skills. I think the more we can kind of look to broaden the, training or education or, making it less cool to not fulfill your parental, obligations, kind of almost with, with similar with the students. I think that's a huge thing too.
I agree, and that's a great way to wrap up our presentation today. So I really do appreciate Linda and Greg, and once again, sorry that I was off on the hour. I don't know what happened to me. But next month, at the same exact time, on March 16th, our next webinar will be addressing overdose. It'll be addressing overdose, death, injury, and disease, why it's important to support harm reduction. There's going to be a lot of talk in the next coming months about harm reduction, and we're going to address that topic next month. It's been one of the deadliest years on record for overdose deaths, and yet we have many tools that can save loved ones. This webinar that is coming up in March is designed to help you understand what harm reduction is, why it can save lives, and the steps communities and families can take to prevent the often deadly outcomes of the opioid epidemic. So I hope you join us again next month.